And I suppose it is that, because a lot of people were asking about the context of the paper being now and the recession. And I suppose it leads us to say that the greatest type of poverty we should fear in a recession is the poverty of our imaginations, to imagine a better way out of it and the better world that we could strive to in the future. And the anti-poverty work and the community development work, that's the key focus for a lot of the groups in this room, is about working with communities to enable them translate their reality and articulate what they want for a better future. And that's very challenging in terms of how do you put words on what people want and define it. So while Peadar looked at the space around ideas and values, what I wanted to look at a little bit more was what is the role of social movements in trying to articulate ideas and values, and where are the spaces and the places or the kinds of strategies that they can find to articulate and win those battles for ideas. So the ideas come first, but then you've got to own ideas and move them forward. And a starting point for that is, well, where are people debating now? Where are their ideas being won and lost now in debate? And we thought a useful starting point in terms of trying to analyse what was the most recent big battle that was going on about a model of development that the community and voluntary sector were involved in. And that was in 2005 around the idea of a developmental welfare state. So this was a debate that was framed in social partnership, which looked at, can we reform the Irish social model in order to re-envisage what it could deliver in terms of social outcomes? And I suppose if we look at the development welfare state, we can be quite critical of it from a number of perspectives. But before being critical of it, just to say, part of the challenge for groups like this is that when you're trying to engage in battles about ideas, there are two ways of doing it. We can be defensive and we can be offensive. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the experience of groups is that we tend to be defensive as a matter of necessity sometimes, and sometimes because it's what we're used to being. So to some degree, a lot of it is making sure somebody else's idea doesn't win, instead of having the foresight to be trying to lead the debate and make sure that different kinds of ideas go in. So when we look at the developmental welfare state, we can certainly be critical about it, but I suppose the challenge is to be constructively critical about things so that what we want instead of them can begin to emerge out of those debates, not to be so defensive that we're not bringing offensive ideas with us to replace what we want to put away. So one of the key issues about the developmental welfare state, which is based on a life cycle approach to social policy, is, as Peadar was saying earlier, the degree to which it lets down an equality agenda, in that it doesn't fully engage with the issues of diversity and the issues of recognition and identity. It tends to focus more on the redistributive issues, how we organise our income supports, our public services, but it doesn't take on the challenge of analysing that in the context of an equality framework. And that's a pity, because there was consensus won earlier in social partnership about the importance of an equality framework that didn't just focus on redistribution, but also focused on representation, recognition and care as important elements. So because of that, the developmental welfare state doesn't appreciate enough and doesn't bring forward enough the issue of discrimination as a key factor that people need to overcome in a battle for equality. Neither does it, from a gender perspective, engage enough in the agenda around care, or appreciate enough the degree to which the care dimension in women's lives in particular stops other opportunities developing for them. The development welfare state is organised around three core concepts: the idea of core services, core public services, the idea of income supports, and the idea of core services and income supports being backed up by local, tailored, activist kind of local specialist services for people in need. And that's, again, a very useful framework that we can be very constructive about in imagining an alternative Ireland. However, what we're seeing in practice is some of the key concepts behind the idea of a development welfare state not being translated into policy decisions or budgetary decisions as we move forward. So, for example, the developmental welfare state argues very strongly for serious investment in public services around care and health. But at the same time that's on paper the policy, what we see in practice is a privatisation of health and the development of co-location of private hospitals. It argues for public investment in care, but what we see is the development of tax incentives for elder care and the privatisation of childcare. So we're not seeing a consistency between what's articulated as a policy vision by the state and then the practice of what they're doing in terms of rolling out public. What the paper tries to do then is to say, well, look, if the developmental welfare state, it may be a good place to start from, but it needs a lot of reworking to bring with it the imagination that's required for an equality agenda to be firmly visible in its agenda. Are there other ways of thinking about models of development that could be useful to try and imagine a different kind of world? And we've brought in from the academic world that we work in 3 different sets of academic literature that try and engage in conceptual ways of thinking about how countries organise their economic and their social policies, ways of dividing up countries and seeing some countries have a particular type of capitalism, some countries have a different type. Do some get better outcomes than the other? So we drew on a model of development by Sapir, who divided up all the European countries into 4 different models of development. And he saw that some countries managed to work their economic and social policies so that they got good economic outcomes in terms of efficient growth, but they also got good social outcomes in terms of equity and fairness and high levels of equality. Other countries managed maybe to get good economics but low inequality, like Ireland. Other countries managed to get poor economics and poor inequality. So we certainly weren't looking there. But certainly the model of development literature signalled that there are countries that have a combination of economic and social policies that deliver good economics and good equity from the point of view of social outcomes. There's a whole other body of literature called Varieties of Capitalism literature, and it tends to divide Europe again into 2 sets of economic approaches. Liberal approaches, which leave a lot to the market, and coordinate approaches, which we leave a healthier relationship maybe between the state's role in regulating the market to provide social outcomes. No surprise that Ireland belongs in the set of European countries that you call the liberal market economies, ones that leave a lot to the market in terms of delivering outcomes. Again, useful to look at what would it need to do to belong to the other set, which rely more on the role of the state in regulating the market to ensure social outcomes are delivered from the market economy. The third set of literature is Esping Anderson's Welfare Regimes, that I'm sure some people would be familiar with. And basically, it analyses the different ways countries approach their social policy and highlights the fact that you can have means-tested approaches which will tend to focus on anti-poverty outcomes. You can have social insurance-dominated approaches which tend to do very good for people in work but not so good for people who don't have access to the labour market. And you can have universal approaches which tend to generate the greater equality in terms of social outcomes. So again, evidence, demonstrable evidence that there are different ways of cutting up economic and social policy to deliver better outcomes at the end of the day. And I suppose that's important because over the last 20 years, we have been led into a mantra that suggests there is no alternative to the economic and social model we have. We're told we're a highly globalised economy, a very vulnerable economy to the international political economy, and that we really have no alternative but to dice the carrots the way we're doing it. In fact, we can cut them any way we want, and different countries show that they haven't suffered hugely from taking a much more imaginative approach, a braver approach to trying for a more equitable slicing of what's going on. So alternatives are possible is the message from that part of the paper, and that's chapter 3 and 4.